December 21st, 1941. 10 minutes to 10 at night. Kapitänleutnant Gerhard Bigalk pressed his eye to the periscope of U-751 and saw something that stops every submariner cold. A massive shadow. So large, it filled almost his entire field of view. He picked up a pencil and wrote in his war diary, "The shadow is so enormous it occupies no less than 2 full periscope fields." He decided he was looking at a fleet carrier, 23,000 tons of British steel. He was wrong. The ship he was targeting cost the British government £12. Literally £12. That was the auction price of 29 barrels of pickled sheepskins found in the hold when the vessel was brought into Jamaica. The skins sold as prize cargo. The ship itself was free. It was a German banana freighter, captured in the Caribbean 18 months earlier. 400 and some feet of refrigerated cargo ship with a wooden deck nailed on top of the main deck. No hangar, no command island, no armor. 6 fighters under tarpaulins on an open deck. The Navy called it the first escort carrier in history. The Ministry of Supply called it a waste. Here's what the official books won't tell you. HMS Audacity wasn't sunk because the Germans beat her. She was sunk because nobody, not the Admiralty, not her commander, not the convoy escort, had yet figured out how to protect her properly. She did everything that was asked of her. She died before anyone understood how to keep her alive. In 187 days, 4 convoys, not a single offensive strike, patrols only, she changed the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic more than any naval engagement in the entire war. And before we get to how that happened, one thing that almost nobody talks about. Germany could have built the same thing. They had the shipyards, they had the aircraft. One man wouldn't allow it. We'll get to who before the end. If you want to understand how a banana boat destroyed a wolf pack, stay with me. To understand why a ship like Audacity was needed at all, you have to understand what was going on in the Atlantic by the summer of '41. Convoys had been running for nearly 2 years, and the convoy system, merchant ships moving in a tight group surrounded by warships, basically worked. A lone ship in the ocean is easy prey. 30 ships with destroyers around them is a different conversation. A German submariner who surfaced inside a convoy formation at night was either very brave or very short-lived, usually both at once. But there was one problem: the middle of the ocean. Picture a map of the Atlantic. On the left, Newfoundland and Iceland. On the right, Britain. Aircraft from Iceland could cover the first 400 miles of the route. Aircraft from Newfoundland could cover the last 400 miles. In between, 800 miles where nothing could reach. Not a single aircraft from any shore. That's where the Germans drove the convoys. Inside that zone, the merchant sailors had no warning of a wolf pack. None at all. The first signal was a torpedo detonating against the side of the ship next to you. Now picture yourself as a merchant sailor in '41. You leave Liverpool. The first few days, there are aircraft from Iceland overhead, and you breathe a little easier. Then they turn back, and you know that for the next several days, all you have is the corvettes around you and the darkness. And somewhere out there, under the water, submarines are already moving toward you. You just don't know from which direction. That's why the Condor was so dangerous. The thing that drove the convoys into that zone was this: the Focke-Wulf 200 Condor. Before the war, it was a Lufthansa passenger liner. The Germans fitted it with cannon, machine guns, and extra fuel tanks, and it could take off from Bordeaux, circle around Ireland, cross the full width of the Atlantic, and land in Norway. The whole time it simply circled above the convoys and broadcast by radio. Here they are. Here's their course. Here's their speed. And the wolf packs below listened and moved to intercept. Churchill called the Condor the scourge of the Atlantic. That wasn't an exaggeration. From the summer of '40 through the beginning of '41, these aircraft helped sink more than 100 ships. More than 360,000 tons of cargo on the ocean floor. Sailors who worked that route would see a Condor high overhead, flying at an altitude anti-aircraft guns couldn't reach, and just wait. They knew the submarines would come at night. Anti-aircraft guns couldn't reach it. Destroyers could chase submarines, but couldn't jam the radio transmissions. Britain had 9 fleet carriers for the entire war, and 7 of them were tied up in the Mediterranean and Norway. There wasn't a single one to spare for babysitting merchant ships in the middle of the Atlantic. In April of 41, 60 fully loaded ships went to the bottom in a single month. 60 in 30 days. Churchill would later write that the only thing that truly frightened him during the war was the Atlantic. Not Dunkirk, not the bombing of London. The Atlantic. Because if ships are sinking faster than they're being built, Britain just slowly dies. And here's where one man at the Admiralty came up with an answer. Captain Slattery, who handled aviation material. His idea was simple to the point of seeming crude. Take a captured merchant vessel, cut off the superstructure, nail a flight deck on top, put 6 fighters on it, send it with a convoy. The fighters wouldn't bomb submarines. The Martlet carried no bombs and no depth charges. They would do something more important. They wouldn't let the Condor transmit coordinates, or they'd drive it so high the transmission became unreliable. And if they spotted a surfaced submarine, they'd come in with guns and it would dive. Underwater, a submarine is blind, slow, and draining its batteries by the hour. The Ministry of Supply said no. The aircraft were needed by Fighter Command. A carrier without armor and without a hangar would burn from the first hit. If a Martlet couldn't make the landing, goodbye aircraft, goodbye pilot, no replacements. Mechanics would have to work right on the open deck, in the cold, in the spray, by flashlight, because there was no hangar. People called the idea a coffin with wings. But Slattery already had a specific ship in mind. It was sitting in a dock. MV Hanover, a German refrigerated cargo ship built in '39. She ran between Germany and the Caribbean carrying bananas. 17 knots, diesel engines designed for long ocean passages. An ordinary workhorse of the merchant fleet. When the war started, she was in the Caribbean. Captain von Schaffe got his orders. Sit in neutral waters and wait. In March of 40, the orders changed. Germany was winning. It seemed like home might be reachable. Von Schaffe got the command to run the British blockade back to Bremen. He almost made it. On the night of the 7th of March, 40, they caught him. The British cruiser HMS Dunedin and the Canadian destroyer HMCS Assiniboine in the Mona Passage between Haiti and Puerto Rico. That same passage everyone tried to slip through on their way home illegally. Von Schaffe opened the seacocks and set fire to the holds. Standard procedure. Don't let the ship fall into enemy hands. It didn't work. A British boarding party went aboard the burning, already listing vessel. 4 days of fighting fires and sealing cocks. When it was over, they had an intact, barely scorched, 17-knot refrigerator ship. Towed to Kingston, Jamaica, renamed Sinbad. British flag raised. In the holds, they found 29 barrels of pickled sheepskins, sold at auction in London, raised 12 pounds. That's what the starting point of a decision that would change the entire Battle of the Atlantic was worth. 12 pounds and 4 days of work by a boarding party on a burning ship. In January of 41, the ship was brought to the Blythe Dry Docks and Shipbuilding Company in Northumberland, a small yard. Hanover was the largest vessel they had ever handled. Workers watched the cranes lifting away the superstructure piece by piece and asked, "What are you replacing it with?" They were shown drawings. A wooden and steel flight deck, 450 feet long, 60 feet wide, raised 18 feet above the main deck on a framework of stanchions and girders. 3 arresting wires aft, 1 emergency barrier, and nothing else. No island, no lift, no hangar. The Ministry of Supply kept saying, waste. The yard worked 7 days a week. 5 months later, it was done. On the 17th of June, 1941, HMS Audacity, they dropped the word Empire in July, just Audacity was left, was commissioned. Commander Douglas McKendrick was appointed in command. The pilots of 802 Naval Air Squadron came aboard, 6 men. 6 Grumman Martlet aircraft, that's the American F-4F Wildcat, in case you don't know it. A rough, heavy, reliable machine. 6 machine guns in the wings. In the right hands, lethal. The squadron commander's briefing was straight to the point. The ship used to carry bananas. The deck is half the size of a real carrier. No hangar. The aircraft sit outside in whatever weather the North Atlantic decides to deliver. If you lose a machine and can't land it, it goes in the water, and there's no replacement until Gibraltar. Maintenance is at night, on the open deck by flashlight. The first landing was made by Eric Brown, the 10th of July. 21 years old, a Scot from Leith, slight and quiet. He would later write in his memoirs that his first arrested landing was either the best or the worst of any pilot's life. He called his own lucky. On the 12th of August, all 6 pilots did their familiarization flights. Each man needed at least 3 arrested landings before they declared him fit for combat operations. One of them had a little carrier experience. Most came straight from the shore course, where they trained on a runway outline painted on the ground. On the ground, it doesn't roll. On the ground, a sudden gust doesn't push you toward the edge of the deck. On the ground, you don't miss the wire and go into the water. They got it fast. There was no other option. Now, here's what life was actually like on board. They slept in the holds, the same ones where the bananas used to be. The refrigeration insulation was still there. That was the one thing to be grateful for. But the cooling pipes hadn't gone anywhere, and when the engines were running at full power, the vibration was enough that you could only sleep in the intervals between watches when the speed came down. The ship could do 15 knots. The convoys went at 7 or 8. Every time the convoy accelerated because of a threat, Audacity cranked up the revolutions, and the vibration went through every bulkhead like blows. Anyone who'd managed to fall asleep woke up. The mechanics worked nights every other night. A shift on deck lasted as long as the aircraft needed, not as long as the man could take. In heavy weather, they tied themselves to deck fittings with ropes so they wouldn't get washed overboard. The tarpaulins over the aircraft filled with water and sagged onto the people working underneath. They warmed the hydraulic fluid in their hands before pumping it, because otherwise it wouldn't flow. They cycled the guns by hand so the lubricant wouldn't congeal in the cold. And if a torpedo hit the ship, no armored compartments, no protected spare parts stowage, no sheltered workshop. One hit in the engine room. Over. One hit in the aviation fuel tanks. She just wasn't there anymore. McKendrick understood this. Every man aboard understood this. They put to sea anyway. From September through November of 41, Audacity made 3 convoy runs. OG-74 outbound to Gibraltar. HG-74 back. OG-76 out again. If you read the records of those convoys, there's nothing dramatic in them. No big battle, no turning point. But if you read carefully, one simple thing stands out. The Condors came. They always came. German agents in Gibraltar reported every departing convoy to Berlin within hours. Composition, escort, course. So over every convoy, sooner or later, a Condor appeared at altitude, circled, and started transmitting. The Martlets intercepted. And the Condors didn't finish transmitting. The wolf packs that were supposed to be waiting on the route either didn't get the coordinates at all or got them too late. The convoys reached Gibraltar and came back to Liverpool with losses below the average. On one of those runs, HG-74, Brown attacked a Condor head-on, alone. The thing was, a Condor had a dead zone at the nose. Its defensive guns couldn't traverse far enough forward. Brown worked that out himself from watching the previous run, and simply flew straight at the nose of the thing and pressed the trigger. The Condor went into the Atlantic. On the next convoy, OG-76, his squadron commander, Lieutenant Commander Winter, was shot down. The first combat loss. Brown landed his damaged aircraft back on the deck, with a piece of German aileron stuck in the tail wheel. 3 convoys. Not a single wolf pack managed to form up and attack properly. Without the Condor, a wolf pack is blind. The Admiralty ordered 6 more escort carrier conversions on the strength of those runs. But the right doctrine, how to keep the carrier alive, where to position her in the formation at night, never got worked out. That would cost Audacity dearly in December. If the story of Brown hunting condors from a 400-foot wooden deck is the reason you're here, subscribing helps the channel and means you won't miss the next one. Now, December. The commander of the escort for HG-76 was Commander Frederick John Walker. Johnny Walker, as everyone in the Navy called him. He'd spent his entire pre-war career on anti-submarine work. Tactics, exercises, theory of hunting submerged vessels. The Admiralty considered him too theoretical and kept him inshore postings. He was 43. He watched younger officers with less of his specific experience getting the commands he'd spent his life preparing for. And he was starting to think the war would end before he got to sea. In October of 41, he was given the 36th Escort Group. 2 months later, his group escorted HG-76. The convoy sailed from Gibraltar on the 14th of December. 32 merchant ships, 9 columns, course for Liverpool. German agents on the other side of the bay transmitted the composition, escort, and departure time to Berlin the same day. Dönitz assembled a wolf pack with the code name Seeräuber, Sea Robber, and placed it directly across the convoy's route. 7 submarines, then 9, then 10. And 1 standing order for all of them, one Dönitz never abandoned in any subsequent convoy battle. Sink the carrier first, whatever the escort cost them, whatever merchant ships they had to let go. Walker placed Audacity on the starboard flank of the convoy. 14 knots, 4 aircraft ready on deck. Walker had his own setup. He called it Operation Buttercup. At the first torpedo explosion, every escort ship turns outward and runs a pre-assigned course, dropping depth charges at pre-assigned points. It creates a zone of explosive coverage that a diving submarine can't avoid simply by going deep and going quiet. He'd practiced it on the Gibraltar run the month before. Never had the chance to use it yet. 2 days, the convoy moved undetected through the patrol line. Every man at his post through the entire night. Ships in complete blackout. Escorts holding position by radar. At noon on the 16th of December, a Focke-Wulf 200 came out of high cloud. It circled the convoy at 12,000 feet and began transmitting. The hunt was on. What happened over the next 6 days wasn't one battle. It was a 6-day war of attrition. Dönitz threw submarines one after another. Walker knocked them down one at a time. And 4 martlets flew 10 hours a day in conditions that would have closed any shore airfield. On the 17th of December, one of Audacity's martlets spotted a surfaced submarine 20 miles from the convoy. The boat was running on diesels, trying to get ahead and take up position for a night attack. The pilot transmitted coordinates and held a circle above it. Walker directed the destroyer Stanley to the contact. But first, Sub-Lieutenant Graham Fletcher. He came in on the submarine alone. U-131 opened up with anti-aircraft fire. Fletcher opened fire back. They were shooting at each other head-on. Fletcher hit the gun crew. Fletcher got hit too. His engine stopped. He didn't pull out. He went in at full speed. But he'd kept the submarine on the surface for 4 minutes. That was enough. Walker's ships arrived. Depth charges forced U-131 back up. The crew jumped overboard. 42 prisoners. The first submarine in history sunk with the direct help of an aircraft from an escort carrier. On the 18th, a second boat. Stanley found her on Azdic. The escorts drove her to the surface. U-434. The crew was going overboard before she rolled over. 2 days, 2 submarines. The price, 1 pilot, 1 aircraft. On the 19th, the Germans hit back. U-574 put a torpedo into Stanley. The destroyer blew apart. Walker's second-in-command went down with most of his crew in under a minute. That same day, Walker chased another submarine for 40 minutes. It kept turning inside the radius of his own ship's turn and staying out of reach. So he just drove into it. Rammed it. Stork's bow crumpled. The Aztec dome shattered. But U-574 went to the bottom. Walker returned to his station with a wrecked bow and no sonar, and kept commanding. That same day, another Condor appeared, flying low, trying to track the convoy through deteriorating weather. Brown attacked head-on. Same technique, same dead zone ahead. Condor in the water. His wingman repeated it on a third Condor and landed back with a piece of German aileron in his tail wheel. By the 20th, the squadron had 3 serviceable aircraft. The mechanics hadn't slept properly in nearly a week. Working at night on the open deck by shielded flashlights, spray coming over the bow continuously, hands going numb, warming hydraulic fluid in their hands before pumping it because otherwise it wouldn't go, cycling the guns by hand so the grease wouldn't seize up. Not a single mistake in 4 convoys. Think about that. Mechanics who haven't slept, in wet gloves on a rolling deck by the light of 1 flashlight, and not a single mistake. Because the pilot pays for the mistake. They knew that. On the morning of the 21st, Brown was back in the air, and he saw something strange. 2 submarines on the surface, side by side. Between the conning towers, a wooden plank. Men crossing from one boat to the other, transferring crew, equipment, ammunition, in broad daylight. The pack commander had decided that in this weather, aircraft definitely weren't flying. Brown strafed both boats. The men on the plank were killed. Both submarines dived before a second martlet could arrive. Neither one sank a single ship in this convoy. That evening, Brown flew his last patrol at 7:20, almost in darkness, with no deck lighting. He landed by dead reckoning, using the ship's wake to guide himself on approach. That was his last landing on HMS Audacity. He didn't know it was the last. Nobody knew. Just another day ending. On the bridge at that moment, McKendrick was talking with his navigator about what to do next. 6th day of continuous fighting. Out of 32 ships, they'd lost 2. Sunk 4 submarines, lost 1 destroyer and 1 pilot. And 1 more night ahead, with 3 aircraft that don't fly in the dark, with an escort commander who had no sonar and a wrecked bow. The men on the bridge hadn't slept properly in more than a week. Tired men make decisions by habit and by logic. Log pointed to the familiar. Every previous night, McKendrick had taken Audacity out of the convoy. 10 miles to starboard, into open ocean. The reasoning was simple. A carrier is a huge target with a distinctive silhouette. At night, when merchant ships fire illumination rockets at the slightest alarm, it's visible for miles. A torpedo aimed at her inside the convoy formation could accidentally hit a merchant ship. Better to pull her clear. He gave the familiar order. Audacity moved off to starboard. No escort. Every ship was tied to the merchant columns. She went into the darkness alone. Walker never spoke publicly about that decision afterward. In his reports, it's just a fact. Carrier detached from formation. No comment. No explanation. He knew McKendrick was doing what he always did. It just came out differently this time. At 8:23, the Norwegian freighter Anavor took a torpedo from U-567 and broke in 2. Gone in under a minute. One of the sailors fired illumination rockets to mark the position for rescuers. The rockets rose astern of Audacity and lit her against the night sky. Gerhard Bigalk in the periscope of U-751 was 200 yards off her port quarter. He wrote in his diary, "The shadow is so enormous it occupies no less than 2 full periscope fields." He fired 3 torpedoes. The first hit at 21:37, aft. The engine room flooded immediately. The rudder jammed. Audacity stopped. Bigalk came around. He took 25 minutes to reload. At 22:02, he came back in from ahead. 2 torpedoes, both forward. The aviation fuel tanks exploded. The bow tore off. The flight deck began going into the water. The 3 remaining martlets standing on it, their lashings snapped. Brown was on deck waiting to abandon ship. He watched the aircraft slide down the tilting deck. They were picking up speed. The men running ahead of them toward the stern weren't fast enough. The shouting mixed with the sound of metal. Brown took one thing from his cabin, his personal flight log. Not letters from home, not a photograph. The log. He jumped 20 feet into the December Atlantic. HMS Audacity went down bow first at 22:10. 70 minutes from the first hit. 73 men were lost. 225 survivors were picked up by the corvettes in the dark. Brown spent 3 hours in the water. Of the 24 men from his squadron who went in, 2 made it to rescue. The cold killed the rest. Walker didn't stop. At 20 minutes past midnight, the sloop Deptford ran down U-567, the one that had sunk Anavor, and accidentally lit up Audacity. Her commander was Engelbert Endras, one of the 5 U-boat commanders Dönitz personally named as his best. Co-commander with Gunther Prien on the Scapa Flow raid, where they sank HMS Royal Oak. 32 confirmed torpedo hits. Knight's Cross with oak leaves. Men like that couldn't be replaced, only grown. Experience accumulated only at sea, only over years. Deptford held contact until U-567 stopped answering. Endras and his entire crew disappeared without trace. By the morning of the 22nd, liberators from Northern Ireland were overhead. The Wolf Pack went deep. Dönitz, having lost 4 submarines, called off the operation on the 23rd of December. 30 of the 32 merchant ships of convoy HG-76 reached Liverpool on the 29th of December, 1941. The first victory over a wolf pack in the Battle of the Atlantic. The Admiralty's first response after losing Audacity was to prohibit escort carriers from leaving the convoy formation at night. The right call. The very call that should have been made before HG-76 sailed from Gibraltar. McKendrick wasn't at fault. He was solving a real problem with the only tool he had. The right answer was just found one day too late. Bigalk reported, "Sank a fleet carrier of standard displacement." Berlin trumpeted it on the radio. Hitler awarded Bigalk the Knight's Cross. Germany lived with that mistake until the end of the war. Before moving on, it's worth stopping on that mistake, because it says something about how badly Germany understood what it was dealing with. Bigalk sank a converted banana boat and reported a fleet carrier. Berlin believed it. And for the rest of the war, the German High Command went on thinking it had destroyed something ordinary, one large ship. They never understood that they had sunk an idea that had already been copied 130 times. 7 months later, in July of '42, 2 British bombers caught U-751 on the surface in the Bay of Biscay and sent her to the bottom with all 48 aboard. Bigalk didn't survive. The pilots of Audacity, 20-year-olds who died of cold in the Atlantic in December of '41, were avenged by aircraft of that same type, the need for which their deaths had proved. Here's something that almost never gets talked about. Germany saw what happened to HG-76. 4 submarines in a single convoy. Catastrophic losses. Dönitz understood. The carrier had changed everything. His answer was, sink carriers at every opportunity. But there was another question he didn't ask. Could we do the same thing ourselves? The answer in 42 was yes. German shipyards could have handled the conversions. The aircraft were there. The Focke-Wulf 190, which was just going into production, was several times better than the Martlet. German escort carriers in the Atlantic in 42 would have changed everything. The German Navy had actually started building a carrier. Graf Zeppelin, laid down in 36. By the time the war started, she was 60% complete. She was never finished. Why? Because all aircraft in Germany were under Göring's command. Reichsmarshal Göring, who sincerely believed that everything that flew belonged to him, and he had no intention of handing aircraft and pilots over to the Navy. That's it. That's the whole answer. Not technology, not material shortages. Departal politics and personal rivalry. Göring blocked the German carrier program because he didn't want to share. Graf Zeppelin was used as a warehouse, then scuttled, then raised, then sunk again. A story of institutional stupidity written in one hull. Britain had no money, no spare ships, no time, and built the first escort carrier out of a German banana boat for £12. Germany had everything and did nothing because one official didn't want to share aircraft. The Americans picked up the idea. Henry Kaiser, the man who built Liberty ships on an assembly line like cars, looked at the escort carrier concept and understood the key thing. It was a merchant ship with a deck on top. And merchant ships were what he built. Kaiser's yard started turning out one escort carrier per week. Per week. The Casablanca class alone, 50 ships. Combined with the other classes, by the end of the war the Allies had 130 escort carriers. They closed the gap in the middle of the Atlantic. They covered the landings in North Africa and Normandy. They went to the Pacific and to the Indian Ocean. 1% of their total displacement was HMS Audacity. The other 99% was everything she had made possible. In April of 43, convoy ONS-5 was crossing the Atlantic. 38 merchant ships. German intelligence directed 30 submarines onto it. 30 against one convoy. By the standards of 41, that was the end. 13 ships were lost, but 7 submarines were sunk. Germany was losing a boat with 50 trained men for every 2,000 tons of cargo sunk. 2,000 tons Kaiser could build in 8 weeks. 50 trained submariners couldn't be reproduced on any schedule. On the 24th of May, 43, Dönitz recalled the Wolf packs from the North Atlantic. His own order logged in his diary. He never sent them back. In May of 43, he lost 41 submarines in 30 days, a quarter of his operational fleet. There was no making up those losses, not because there weren't enough boats, but because there weren't enough men who knew how to fight in them. Dönitz wrote that the Allied ability to detect submarines had fundamentally changed. He pointed to radar, ASDIC, long-range aircraft. All of that was real, but underneath it was one thing. There was no longer a zone in the middle of the Atlantic where you could hunt without consequence. Aircraft flew there now, too. Here's what that meant in practice. A sailor on a merchant ship in 43, crossing the Atlantic, could see an escort carrier from the deck. Small, low, no island. Could watch the aircraft take off and come back. For a man who in 41 had watched a Condor overhead and simply waited for nightfall, that was something completely different. Someone was watching for him. Someone was flying. The Battle of the Atlantic was decided on the 24th of May, 43. Audacity had been on the bottom for 17 months. It all started with a memorandum to the Admiralty in the spring of 41. It said, "There's a captured German banana boat in a Northumberland dock. Proposal: nail a flight deck on top." Walker wrote one key thing in his report on HG 76. The presence of the carrier, he wrote, gave him for the first time the ability to know where the submarines were before they came within attack range. Previously, he found out about them when Asdic found a contact at a few hundred yards. Now, at 20 or 30 miles. The difference between hunting and waiting. The report went to the desks of the men writing the tactical manuals, and they rewrote the manuals. In 43, Walker was given command of the 2nd Support Group, the first dedicated hunter-killer formation in Royal Navy history, not tied to any convoy. 6 sloops that could chase a submarine for days. When they came back to Liverpool, Walker would pipe, "A hunting we will go," over the loudspeakers. From January through July of 44, his group sank 18 submarines, more than any other Allied commander. On the 9th of July, 44, he died of a cerebral hemorrhage without leaving his ship. 48 years old. Churchill called him the greatest anti-submarine hunter of the war. He was buried at sea on the Mersey route, the same water he'd been taking his groups down into the Atlantic. He began doing what he was good at only after Audacity showed it could be done. On the 22nd of December, 1941, the corvette HMS Marigold pulled Eric Brown out of the Atlantic. He'd been in the water 3 hours. The ship's doctor wasn't sure he'd survive the next 2. He did. Of the 24 pilots of 802 Squadron who went into the sea that night, 2 made it to rescue. Brown was one of them. He went on to fly 487 different types of aircraft, more than anyone in history, confirmed by the Guinness Book of Records. 2,407 carrier landings, the first carrier landing of a jet aircraft in the world, HMS Ocean, the 3rd of December, 45, a de Havilland vampire. He interrogated Goering, interrogated Messerschmitt, flew captured German jets, including the Me-262. Brown lived a long life and told that December evening story many times. He was a good storyteller. But one thing he never talked about willingly, only when asked directly. They asked him in interviews, when he was over 90, "What do you consider the most important thing in your life?" Not testing jet aircraft, not the records, not the German engineers. Convoy HG-76. 4 martlets over the Atlantic against a wolf pack. He said that what he remembered most clearly about that night wasn't the cold of the water, not the fear. He remembered the aircraft sliding down the tilting deck, and the shouts of the men running ahead of them who didn't make it in time. He heard that until the end of his life. He died in February of 2016, 96 years old. He outlived every pilot who had flown from Audacity, outlived Dönitz, outlived the Atlantic. Convoys. Outlived the entire strategic world in which a first landing on a wooden deck of a banana boat turned out to be the most important decision in naval aviation of the entire war. The pilot of the first escort carrier became the pilot of the first jet aircraft on a carrier. The wooden deck in July of 41, the arresting wires on HMS Ocean in December of 45. 4 years and 5 months. The beginning and end of one story. The banana boat that broke the Condor. The coffin with wings that closed the gap. The ship Germany believed was a fleet carrier, and which Britain built from prize cargo worth 12 pounds. 187 days. That is HMS Audacity. If this is the kind of history you're here for, like and subscribe. The next one is already in production. Don't miss it.